5.2 Parallelogram presented by Sidine Razia Binti Shams Uddin. What is a parallelogram? A parallelogram is a quadrilateral whose opposite sides are parallel. Principle involving properties of parallelogram. Principle 1. The opposite sides of a parallelogram are parallel. For example, line AB congruent to line DC and line AD congruent to line DC. Principle 2. A diagonal of a parallelogram divides it into two congruent triangles. For example, triangle ABC congruent to triangle DBC. Principle 3. The opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. Line AD congruent to line BC and line AB congruent to line DC. Principle 4. The opposite angles of parallelogram are congruent angles. A congruent to angles C and angles B congruent to angles D. Principle 5. The consecutive angles of a parallelogram are supplementary. Angle A is supplement of both angle B and angle D. Principle 6. The diagonals of parallelogram bisect each other. Line AE congruent to line ED and line B congruent to line EC, proving the quadrilateral in a parallelogram. Principle 7. A quadrilateral is a parallelogram if its opposite sides are parallel. If line AB parallel to line CD and line AD parallel to line BC, then ABCD is a parallelogram. Principle 8. A quadrilateral is a parallelogram if its opposite sides are congruent. If line AB congruent to line CD and line AD congruent to line BC, then ABCD is a parallelogram. Principle 9. A quadrilateral is a parallelogram if two sides are congruent and parallel. If line AB congruent to line DC and line AB parallel to line DC, then ABCD is a parallelogram. Principle 10. A quadrilateral is parallelogram if its opposite angles are congruent. If angle A congruent to angle C and angle B congruent to angle D, then ABCD is a parallelogram. Principle 11. A quadrilateral is a parallelogram if its diagonal bisect each other. If line AE congruent to line ED and line BE congruent to line EC, then ABCD is a parallelogram. Proving a parallelogram problem.
Created using Powtoon.